Hey everyone, welcome to our deep dive. You
Yeah.
sent over some excerpts from Richard Koch's book on the 80-20 principle, and I am so ready to dig in.
Me too. It's a fascinating concept and one that can really change how you view pretty much everything.
Exactly, and it's something I've been thinking about a lot lately. Like, how can we actually leverage this idea to be more effective in our lives?
Well, that's exactly what Koch explores in his book, and he starts by taking us back to the very origins of the principle.
Oh yeah, I'm curious about that. Like, where did this whole 80-20 thing even come from?
Well, it all started back in the late 1800s with an Italian economist named Vilfredo Pareto.
Okay, so we're talking late 1800s, not exactly a modern-day life hack then.
Nope. Pareto was studying wealth distribution in Italy, and he noticed something interesting. 80% of the land was owned by just 20% of the population.
Wow, so that's where the 80-20 split comes from. It's rooted in real-world observations, not just some arbitrary theory.
Exactly. And what's really fascinating is that this pattern doesn't just apply to wealth.
Oh, really? So it pops up in other areas too.
Absolutely. Decades later, a quality control expert named Joseph Duran noticed a similar pattern in manufacturing. He found that 80% of defects were caused by just 20% of the problems.
That's wild. So the same principle at play in economics and manufacturing. It makes you wonder where else it might apply.
Right. And Koch argues that it's pretty much everywhere. You can see it in business and personal life, even in society as a whole.
Okay, now I'm really intrigued. Give me an example. Like, how did this 80-20 thing actually play out in the business world?
Well, one of the most famous examples is the rise of personal computers. Think about companies like Apple and Microsoft back in the early days.
Yeah, they completely revolutionized the tech industry.
Exactly. And they did it in part by applying the 80-20 principle. They realized that they could simplify product design and target the majority of users by focusing on the essential features that would satisfy like 80% of the market.
So instead of trying to create a product with every bell and whistle, they focused on what really mattered to most people.
Exactly. And that allowed them to streamline production, reduce costs, and ultimately reach a much wider audience.
It's brilliant when you think about it. They found that sweet spot between functionality and simplicity.
Right. And that's the power of the 80-20 principle. It's about identifying those key areas where your efforts will have the biggest impact and then focusing your energy there.
So it's not about working harder, it's about working smarter.
Precisely. And that's a concept that can be applied to all sorts of things, from how we run our businesses to how we manage our time and even how we invest our money.
Okay, now you've got my attention. Tell me more about how businesses can actually use this principle to their advantage. I mean, I get the concept, but how do you actually put it into practice?
Well, Koh outlines a few key strategies in his book, and one of the most important is to analyze your business by segments.
Segments, like breaking things down by product line, customer group, things like that.
Exactly. Instead of just looking at your overall profit margin, you really need to understand where those profits are coming from. What are your most profitable products? Who are your most valuable customers? Which activities are driving the most revenue?
So it's about going deeper than just the surface level numbers and really understanding the underlying dynamics of your business.
Precisely. And Kulf gives a great example of this in the book. He talks about a company called Electronic Instruments, Inc. They discovered that a small group of products representing just 30% of their sales were actually generating nearly 67% of their profits.
Wow, that's almost a perfect 80-20 split right there.
It is. And it highlights how important it is to understand the profitability of your offerings, not just chase sales.
So it's not just about selling a lot of stuff, it's about selling the right stuff.
Exactly. And once you understand which segments of your business are the most profitable, you can start to make strategic decisions about how to allocate your resources.
So like investing more in those high-performing areas and maybe cutting back on the less profitable ones.
Precisely. You might also consider ways to improve the profitability of those less profitable segments, maybe by adjusting prices or streamlining operations.
And sometimes it might even make sense to just let go of those less profitable segments altogether.
It's all about making strategic decisions based on where the true value lies within your business.
Right. It's about focusing on what works and letting go of what doesn't. And it sounds like this same principle can be applied to your customer base as well.
Absolutely. Koch talks about the importance of identifying your most valuable customers, the ones who generate the most revenue and are the most likely to stay loyal to your brand.
So it's about figuring out who those 20% of customers are that are driving 80% of your profits.
Exactly. And he suggests going above and beyond for those core customers, providing what he calls outrageous service.
I like that. Outrageous service. So like
Yeah.
exceeding their expectations and making them feel truly valued.
Precisely, because when you invest in those top customers, you're more likely to keep them coming back for more.
It makes sense. It's like the old saying, it's cheaper to keep an existing customer than to acquire a new one.
Exactly. And Cook even suggests reaching out to past customers who haven't done business with you in a while. You never know, they might be ready to come back.
Oh yeah, that's a good point. Sometimes it's easier to rekindle an old flame than to start a new one.
And that's just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to applying the 80/20 principle in business.
It's amazing how this one simple principle can have such a profound impact on how we think about and run our businesses.
And it's not just limited to business either. Koch argues that it can be applied to all areas of our lives.
Okay, now I'm really intrigued. Tell me more about how this principle can be applied to our personal lives. Like, how can we use it to be happier or more productive or just, live better lives?
Well, Koch suggests that we can start by looking at where we spend our time and energy. What activities bring us the most joy and fulfillment? What relationships are the most meaningful and supportive?
So it's about identifying those 20% of activities and relationships that are really driving 80% of our happiness.
Exactly. And then we can start to prioritize those things and let go of the things that aren't serving us as well.
So like if you realize that 80% of your stress comes from 20% of your to-do list, maybe it's time to reevaluate that to-do list and see what you can delegate or eliminate altogether.
Precisely. It's about being intentional with our time and energy and focusing on the things that truly matter to us.
And this principle can even be applied to how we manage our time, right?
Absolutely. Koch challenges the very idea of a time shortage.
Wait, a time shortage? Doesn't everyone feel like they never have enough time?
We do, but Koch argues that we might be approaching time management from the wrong perspective.
Okay, I'm listening.
Instead of assuming that all time is equal, he suggests that we should identify the 20% of our time that leads to the most significant results and happiness, and then find ways to expand those activities.
So it's not about cramming more into our schedules, it's about being strategic about how we spend our time.
Precisely. He uses the example of William Ewart Gladstone, a four-time British prime minister. Gladstone was incredibly effective in his political career, but he also made time for a variety of activities he enjoyed. He didn't let the demands of his work consume his entire life.
That's a good reminder that achieving great things doesn't necessarily require sacrificing everything else.
Exactly. It's more about finding that sweet spot where your efforts align with your passions.
And this idea of alignment is key. Koch even extends this thinking to wealth creation, arguing that it's not just about working hard for a paycheck.
Right. He proposes that building wealth through smart investment is likely more effective than reliance solely on employment income.
So it's not about get-rich-quick schemes, but about taking a long-term strategic approach to growing your wealth.
Exactly. And he believes this approach can be even more powerful when market prices are low, creating opportunities for savvy investors.
So there's a skill to it, a way to leverage expertise and knowledge to make informed decisions about where to invest.
Absolutely. He emphasizes the importance of specialization and identifying promising investment opportunities. You've got to be willing to do your research and understand the market.
That makes sense. You wouldn't just jump into any business venture without understanding the landscape. It seems like the same principles apply to investing. But isn't there always an element of risk, even when you're being strategic?
Of course, no investment is without risk. But Koch argues that by being willing to run games and cut losses, meaning letting your winning investments grow while cutting your losses on the underperforming ones, you can manage that risk effectively.
It sounds like a disciplined approach, not letting emotions get in the way of making smart financial decisions.
Exactly. It's about having a clear strategy and sticking to it even when the market gets volatile.
This has been an incredibly insightful dive into the 80/20 principle so far. We've covered a lot of ground from the history of the concept to its applications in business, personal life, and even investment. What strikes me is that it's not just about working harder or doing more, but about focusing our energy on the things that truly matter and have the potential to create the biggest impact.
And we're just getting started. There's so much more to explore in Koch's book.
You're absolutely right. But for now, we'll leave you with this thought. If we accept that a small percentage of our efforts truly drive the majority of our results, are we willing to challenge our traditional ideas of success and focus on those vital few cons? Stay tuned for part 2, where we'll delve even deeper into the practical applications of the 80/20 principle. Welcome back to our deep dive. We were just starting to get into how businesses can use the 80/20 principle to really amp up their performance.
Yeah, there's so much potential there. And Koch's book really digs deep into the practical side of things. Like, how do you actually apply this principle in a real world business setting?
Exactly. Because it's one thing to understand the concept, but it's another thing altogether to actually put it into action.
Right. And that's where Koch's insights become really valuable. He doesn't just tell you about the 80/20 principle, he shows you how to use it.
So let's talk specifics. What are some of the key strategies he outlines for businesses?
Well, one of the first things he emphasizes is the importance of analyzing profitability by different segments of your business.
Okay, so instead of just looking at your overall profit margin, you break it down by product, by customer group, even by geographic region.
Exactly. You really want to get granular with your analysis and understand where those profits are coming from because you might be surprised by what you find.
Give me an example.
Well, Koch highlights this case study with a company called Electronic Instruments, Inc. They found that a small group of products representing just 30% of their sales were actually generating nearly 67% of their profits.
Wow, that's almost a perfect 80-20 split.
It really is. And it shows how important it is to understand the profitability of your offerings. Not all products are created equal, and some are going to be much more valuable to your bottom line than others.
Right. And once you identify those high-performing segments, it makes sense to really focus on them.
Exactly. You might consider expanding those product lines, developing new products that cater to those high-value customers, or even adjusting your marketing and sales strategies to target those segments more effectively.
Yeah. So it's about doubling down on what's already working well. But what about the less profitable parts of the business? Do you just abandon them?
Not necessarily. You might explore ways to improve their profitability, maybe by adjusting prices or streamlining operations to reduce costs. Or you might consider selling those segments to another company that might be better equipped to manage them.
And sometimes it might even be the right move to just shut those unprofitable segments down altogether.
Right. It's all about making strategic decisions based on where the true value lies within your business.
And the same type of analysis can be applied to your customer base as well, right?
Absolutely. You want to figure out who those 20% of customers are that are driving 80% of your profits.
And then what? Do you give them like a special loyalty program or something?
Well, it goes beyond that. Koch talks about the importance of providing what he calls outrageous service to those core customers.
Outrageous service. That sounds interesting. What does he mean by that?
It's about going above and beyond to meet their needs, exceeding their expectations, making them feel truly valued.
Okay, I can see how that would build loyalty.
Exactly. You want those customers to feel like they're getting something special from you,
Yeah.
something they can't get anywhere else.
Makes sense. But what about those past customers who haven't done business with you in a while? Any advice on how to win them back?
Oh, absolutely. Koch actually shares a story about Bill Bain, the founder of Bain and Company. Back when Bain was selling Bibles door to door, he realized during a lean spell that he could revisit his previous customers and potentially sell them another Bible.
It's a simple concept, but it really highlights the potential that lies in rekindling those existing relationships.
Right. Sometimes those past customers are just waiting for a reason to come back to you.
So we've talked about applying the 80/20 principle to profitability and customers, but I'm curious about how it can be used for something like decision making. That seems a bit more abstract.
It's a great question, and Koch actually devotes a whole chapter to it.
So what's his take on it? Well, he challenges the idea that we need tons of information and analysis before making a decision. He argues that this can lead to analysis paralysis, where you get bogged down in data and never actually take action.
So instead of striving for 100% certainty, it's about making decisions with maybe 80% of the information and being comfortable with adapting as you go.
Exactly. And he even has a specific rule of thumb for important decisions. The 80/20/100 rule.
Okay, I've never heard of that one. What is it?
He suggests gathering 80% of the data and performing 80% of the relevant analysis in the first 20% of the time you have available.
And then what?
Then based on that, you make a decision 100% of the time and act as if you were 100% confident that it's the right one.
So it's about being decisive and committed even when you don't have all the answers.
Exactly. He emphasizes that if what you've decided isn't working, you should be willing to change course early on rather than clinging to a failing plan. He believes the market, in its broadest sense, is a much better indicator than excessive analysis.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Sometimes you just have to try things out and see what happens.
And when something is working really well, Koch advises doubling and redoubling your bets. He argues that when a business consistently exceeds expectations, there's a good chance it can be scaled significantly.
It's about recognizing those opportunities and capitalizing on them while the momentum is there.
Exactly. And this principle isn't limited to just decision-making. Koch shows how it can be applied to other areas of business as well, like inventory management and project management.
I'm curious to hear how it works for inventory management. What's the 80/20 angle there?
Well, Koch points out that in many cases, about 80% of inventory activity involves only about 20% of the actual inventory items. That means businesses can streamline their inventory management by focusing on those high turnover items.
So it's about identifying those fast-moving items and optimizing their storage and retrieval processes to ensure efficiency.
Precisely. And for project management, Koch suggests something pretty unconventional, imposing what he calls an impossible timescale on projects.
Wait, an impossible timescale. How does that work without leading to chaos and burnout?
He argues that by setting tight deadlines, project teams are forced to prioritize the most essential tasks and eliminate anything that's not absolutely necessary. This can actually lead to increased efficiency and focus.
I could see how that sense of urgency could really push a team to be more selective with their time and energy.
And Koch also stresses the importance of planning, especially when you have a tight deadline. He suggests that the shorter the time allowed for a project, the greater proportion of time should be dedicated to planning and thinking it through.
So it's about being strategic and thoughtful in the initial stages
Yeah.
to ensure a smooth and efficient execution phase.
Exactly. And believe it or not, the 80/20 principle can even be applied to something as complex as negotiation.
Negotiation. I'm intrigued. How does that play out?
Well, Koch advises negotiators to start by creating a long list of concerns and requirements that are intentionally unreasonable or at least very difficult for the other party to agree to.
So it's about setting a high bar and creating leverage from the outset.
Exactly. Then, as the negotiation progresses, you can concede on those less important points in exchange for concessions on the things that truly matter to you.
It's a strategic way to maximize your gains by being willing to give on the things that aren't as crucial.
Precisely. This really highlights how versatile the 80/20 principle is. You can apply it to so many different areas of business and life.
It really makes you think about how we can use it to challenge conventional wisdom and find creative solutions to all sorts of problems.
Yeah.
But I do want to address one more area that Koch explores in the book. He talks about the social implications of this principle, which is where things get really interesting.
You're right, that's where the discussion goes beyond just business and personal development. Koch argues that the 80/20 principle has implications for how we think about big societal issues like wealth distribution, education, even crime.
Okay, I definitely want to hear more about that.
Well, for starters, Koch acknowledges that the unequal distribution of wealth is to some extent a natural consequence of the 80/20 principle.
Because markets tend to reward those who are most effective at creating value, which inevitably leads to some degree of inequality.
Exactly. But he's not saying that we should just accept this as inevitable. He believes in creating a system that encourages everyone to participate in the market and contribute to value creation.
So it's not about creating a perfectly equal society, but rather one where everyone has the opportunity to succeed based on their contribution.
Exactly. And Koch sees education as a key factor in achieving this. He argues that we should focus on providing everyone with marketable skills that align with their interests and talents.
That makes sense. If you can equip people with the skills they need to succeed in the market, it creates a more level playing field and a more prosperous society overall.
And Koch even extends this thinking to crime prevention.
Crime prevention. Now, that's something I wouldn't have expected. How does the 80/20 principle come into play there?
He uses the example of New York City in the 1990s when the city saw a dramatic drop in crime rates. Police Commissioner William Bratton recognized that the majority of crime was being committed by a small percentage of offenders, often arising from a small number of specific situations.
So instead of trying to address crime in a broad general sense, he focused on those high-risk individuals and situations.
Exactly. By targeting the 20% of offenders and situations that were causing 80% of the problem, Bratton was able to achieve significant results. It's a great example of how understanding those imbalances can lead to more effective solutions.
This is all incredibly thought-provoking. But I do have one question. Earlier you mentioned the potential for the 80/20 principle to be misinterpreted or misused. What are some of the potential dangers or pitfalls associated with it?
It's an important question. Koch himself acknowledges that this principle can be misinterpreted or applied in ways that can lead to negative consequences. One potential danger is that it can be used to justify inequality or exploitation. For example, if a business leader believes that 80% of their profits come from 20% of their employees, they might be tempted to treat those high-performing employees exceptionally well while neglecting the rest.
So it's important to remember that this principle is a tool for understanding and optimizing systems, not an excuse for treating people unfairly or creating a divisive work environment.
Absolutely. And another potential pitfall is that it can lead to oversimplification. While it's true that complex systems often have imbalances, it's important to avoid reducing everything to a simple 80-20 equation.
Right. We need to use it as a guide for analysis and decision-making, but not let it become a rigid rule that blinds us to the nuances and complexities of the real world.
Exactly. It's also crucial to remember that it's not a guaranteed path to success. While it can help us identify areas of leverage and focus our efforts effectively, there are always other factors that can influence outcomes.
So it's not a magic formula, but rather a valuable tool that can help us make more informed decisions and increase our chances of success.
Precisely. And it's a principle that requires ongoing analysis and adaptation. Those 80-20 relationships within a system can shift over time. So it's important to reevaluate and adjust our approach as needed.
This has been such an insightful discussion. We've covered so much ground, from the practical applications of the 80-20 principle to its potential impact on social issues.
It's been a great exploration of how this principle can help us understand the world around us and make more informed decisions in various aspects of our lives.
And now in part 3, we'll delve even deeper into the philosophical implications of the 80-20 principle and explore how it can change not just our actions, but also our mindset and our understanding of the world around us. All right, we are back for the final part of our 80-20 deep dive. And, we've talked about business, we talked about personal productivity, even social issues, but I feel like there's this whole other level to this principle, almost like a philosophy, a way of seeing the world.
You're absolutely right. It's not just about doing more with less. It's about challenging some of our most basic assumptions about how things work.
Like what kind of assumptions?
Well, think about the idea that effort equals reward. We're often told if we work hard, we'll succeed. But the 80-20 principle suggests it's not always that straightforward.
So it's not just about putting in the hours. It's about understanding where your efforts will have the most impact.
Exactly. And that can be kind of unsettling because it means acknowledging that some things are just outside of our control.
Like luck, timing, even our natural talents.
Precisely. But instead of seeing that as discouraging, Koch suggests that we embrace it because it frees us from this pressure to try and control everything.
So it's about playing the hand you're dealt to the best of your ability.
Exactly. And this leads to another interesting implication of the 80-20 principle, the idea of embracing imbalance.
Imbalance. Isn't balance like the ultimate goal? Like work-life balance?
It's what we're told to strive for. But the 80-20 principle suggests that true effectiveness often comes from focusing on those vital few, even if it means letting go of some other things.
So it's about making choices, prioritizing what really matters.
Exactly. And this applies to everything, from how we spend our time to how we run our businesses to how we structure our lives.
So instead of trying to be good at everything, we should focus on being great at the things that really matter.
Precisely. And that can be a really powerful shift in perspective because it allows us to let go of perfectionism and embrace the idea that it's okay to have areas where we're not excelling
It's like giving ourselves permission to be human.
and to really lean into our strength.
So instead of trying to fix all our weaknesses, we should double down on what we're already good at.
Exactly, because that's where we're likely to have the biggest impact.
This is all incredibly thought-provoking, and it really makes you wonder, if we truly embrace this 80-20 philosophy, how would our lives change?
That's the ultimate question. And the answer is probably different for everyone, but I think it has the potential to really change how we approach everything.
From our work to our relationships to our own personal growth.
It's about letting go of the need to control everything and embracing the inherent imbalance of life.
And focusing on those vital few things that truly bring us joy and fulfillment.
Exactly. It's a powerful idea and one that I think can lead to a more fulfilling and meaningful life.
Well, this has been an amazing deep dive. So many insights, so much to think about.
I agree. It's been a real pleasure exploring this with you.
And I want to thank everyone for joining us on this journey into the world of the 80-20 principle.
Oh.
Remember, it's not about working harder. It's about working smarter. It's about focusing on the things that truly matter. And it's about embracing the imbalance of life. And with that, we'll leave you to ponder this question. How can you apply the 80-20 principle to your own life to achieve greater success and fulfillment? Thanks for listening.